Taking an Alaskan cruise is an unforgettable experience. In this video, I'm going to discuss why an Alaskan cruise tends to be different than other cruises, what are common features to Alaskan cruises if you take a mainstream cruise line, the time of year you might want to take an Alaskan cruise, an itinerary recommendation, and then explore the pros and cons of the 4 cruise lines I've taken to Alaska. First, you may wonder why I've taken 4 cruise lines to Alaska. Put simply, I love to cruise, I don't like to fly, and I live in the Seattle area. With that combination, I've cruised to Alaska a fair amount. Let's talk about the common features of an Alaskan cruise. An Alaskan cruise is different than your more typical cruise in the Caribbean or warm weather destination. 1, the cruise ships for Alaska tend to be more customized for colder weather, which means more inside spaces. The weather in Alaska will often be at least 20 to 30 degrees colder than it would be in Florida at that same time. Cruise lines don't usually put their newest ships in Alaska. So if you really want to go on the newest ship, you'll likely have to pick a different itinerary. Although I've heard that Princess Cruises' new cruise ship, Star Princess, will be going to Alaska. That is exciting that a new ship could finally be doing the Alaska route. 2, in the past, you would see higher cruise fares for Alaska versus other destinations. Now, I think it's a much smaller differential that you'll pay, except during peak season, which I'd say is late June to early August for Alaska. If you go to Alaska during that time frame, you'll likely pay more for a 7-day cruise than you would for a 7-day cruise in the Caribbean. However, what doesn't come down in price are shore excursions. The price of one shore excursion can easily be $200 per person, with whale watching or excursions involving taking a helicopter to a glacier or dog sleds being $400 or more per person. While you will see higher shore excursion prices, these are once-in-a-lifetime excursions that you might want to consider if your budget allows. If going to Alaska is on your bucket list and you're only going to go once, I'd highly encourage you to do the once-in-a-lifetime excursions that you want to do. For instance, I know my daughter would want to do the dog sledding experience. 3, most Alaska itineraries go on the outside passage for at least one of the sea days. The outside passage tends to be rocky seas, much rockier than the Caribbean. All of my outside passage cruises have had almost a solid day of high seas. So if you're prone to being seasick, I really recommend you bring your seasickness prevention tool of choice. It's usually about a 24-hour span of time that you are in the high seas. I'm usually okay, but I do see people walking around looking a little green. If you are really prone to seasickness, you may want to stick to an itinerary that only goes in the inside passage. Definitely check the specific route if this is a concern of yours. This route here is a typical Alaska itinerary. It's round trip from Seattle, and if you follow the arrow from Seattle, you see the path goes on the outside of Canada on the way up to Alaska. So the first sea day will be pretty rocky likely. Once you get into the more protected Alaskan waters, it will be much calmer. 4, for most cruises, you don't need to pack for inclement weather. But for Alaska, I'd at least recommend packing a raincoat, even if you're going in the summer. It doesn't have to be a thick raincoat, just something that will keep you and your phone and your camera dry. I'd also suggest bringing a fleece vest and favorite sweatshirt or coat. Of course, your experience could be completely different. You could go on an April Alaskan cruise and have beautiful weather. Weather can be a crapshoot, and it can turn on a dime in Alaska. You may have heard about taking parkas and snow boots if you're going to Alaska. If you're going on an excursion where you're trudging around in snow, like my daughter's dream excursion of dog sledding, then take the boots. Otherwise, I think you'll be fine with a water-resistant shoe and you can leave the boots at home. This is what I wore in Skagway, Alaska when I went on a 2-hour walk through the town. It was late April, 40 degrees, and very windy near the dock, but there wasn't rain in the forecast that day. I wore a fleece vest with an insulated jacket, a beanie, workout leggings, and regular tennis shoes, and I was completely comfortable. If it had been raining, I would have added my thin rain jacket over all of this. Those tennis shoes were the only shoes I brought. So if it had been raining hard, I probably wouldn't have gone on the long walk. I would have been fine wearing this if it was only lightly raining. My cabin mate brought a parka and wore it on this walk, and also on the deck during Glacier Bay Day. My personal preference is multiple thinner layers instead of a big coat. You know what will work for you. Most ships are pretty warm, so I would recommend packing t-shirts on days you're not exploring Alaska and on the ship. So let's talk about when to take an Alaskan cruise. My 4 cruises to Alaska have been at 4 different times in this season. The Alaska cruise season is typically from May to September, but cruise lines are starting to stretch it to even longer. In recent years, you can cruise in Alaska from mid-April to October, depending on the specific cruise line. I've been early in this season, late April to early May, the peak season of July, and later in this season, once in September and once in October. My impressions are definitely not scientific, since weather really is a crapshoot. And one week it can be beautiful, and then next week it can be awful, at any time in the Alaska season. For me, September ended up being the cruise where I had the best weather. Sun every day, and a hoodie was the heaviest clothing I wore. July was the second best weather, with a couple days of cloudy skies, a few hours of rain, and a hoodie was the heaviest clothing I wore again. October was the third best weather, with a couple days of rain, and late April to early May was the worst weather that I experienced in Alaska. When I say worst weather, I mean we saw the sun for 2 hours max over the course of the week. It was 35 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit, the whole cruise, with a biting wind, and over half the time it was raining. Like I said, it could be this dismal at any time during this season, although I don't think you'll see 40 degrees Fahrenheit in July. You may see 55 degrees as the low in July, though. If you don't mind chilly temperatures, you'll likely find a less expensive cruise fare in April, May, September, and October. You also might find some snow in these months. Glacier Bay will likely have snow-capped mountains, and if you take excursions that go to higher elevations, you might get to play in the snow. I was surprised when I took the White Pass train in Skagway during October that I saw the snow was on the trees already. Even if you go in these colder months, you likely won't see snow in the towns themselves because they are at sea level. If you're a teacher or have kids in school, the peak season of summer is when you'll likely have to go to Alaska. Cruise fares are a bit higher at this time, but you'll likely have decent weather. So let's talk about the itineraries. I'm a bit biased here, but I really do recommend an inside passage day like in Glacier Bay. I've been to Glacier Bay 3 times and I love it there. Glacier Bay is a national park where you can see a few glaciers as well as the possibility of seeing wildlife. It's a fairly narrow passage and there's land on both sides. The cruise ship usually spends 8 or so hours in Glacier Bay. It's a sea day with plenty of viewing opportunities, nature, glacier specifically, and wildlife. Since you're so close to land on both sides, you might catch a mountain goat or bear going about its day. You might also see otters or whales in the water. Depending on availability, you might have a park ranger come on board and narrate and point out specific animal sightings and glaciers. It was difficult to spend a lot of time outside when I was in Glacier Bay in April. In October, I actually experienced pretty decent weather and stayed outside for a chunk of the day while we were in Glacier Bay. And when I went in July, I think I was outside for the whole day. When you look at different cruise line itineraries, I'm going to give you a word of advice. Do look at how long you will be in each port and the time of day you'll be in port. Don't presume that you'll be in each port from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. because that likely won't happen. I've been on 2 cruises that stopped in Victoria, Canada, and both were only for 3 to 4 hours in the evening. It's not just Victoria. Some ports stagger the ships. Because Alaska is a bucket list cruise for many, I don't want you to presume anything and get caught off guard. So thoroughly review the itinerary before you book. So let's talk about why you're likely watching this video, comparing the different cruise lines that I've taken to Alaska. First off, I took these different cruise lines over a number of years, and there were unique things that happen on these specific cruises that likely impacted me, but won't impact you. I'm going to be upfront about my unique experiences because there will likely be some bias due to those, even though I'm going to try to be as objective as possible. My first cruise was way back in 2014 on the Holland America Westerdam. And a few hours in on my first cruise ever, there was a fire on board, and we had to turn around to Seattle. That's a very infrequent occurrence, and of course it happened on my first cruise. We got cleared to sail the next day, but we ended up not going to one of the ports, Sitka. Sitka remains my white whale because it was also on a port on the cruise I took in October, and they canceled Sitka on that itinerary due to weather. So I've had Sitka on 2 different cruise itineraries, and I still haven't made it there. Hopefully the third time will be the charm. The other unique experience is that I took my Royal Caribbean cruise to Alaska right after the cruising restart in 2021. The ship wasn't at capacity. Everyone had to wear masks except when eating or drinking. You couldn't serve yourself at the buffet. After activities, they would sanitize everything a passenger touched. Excursions weren't back to normal. It was a weird time. And a second caution for this part. What appeals to me might not appeal to you. I recently read a statistic that the average cruiser is 47, and I'm 47 right now. So maybe I'm just in my statistically average era right now. But I'm trying to do this as objectively as possible. But again, know that my experiences were shaped by when I took each cruise and what was going on at the time. And those conditions might be completely different now, or when you take your Alaska cruise, either in this season or in a future year. I took 4 cruise ships to Alaska: Holland America Westerdam, Royal Caribbean Ovation of the Seas, Princess Cruises Crown Princess, and Norwegian Encore. So let's talk about passenger age. Holland America tends to have the oldest passengers of the mainstream cruise lines. It's no exception in Alaska. When I was in Juneau and Ketchikan on Norwegian just a few months ago, I saw the exact same Holland America ship that I took in 2014, the Westerdam. And when I walked around Ketchikan, you knew who was on the Holland America ship because they gave their passengers bright orange umbrellas to use. Their passengers were much older than the passengers on Norwegian still. When I took my Holland America cruise in July, there were fewer than 20 kids on that ship. In July, most passengers were in their 60s and many were in their 70s and 80s. Princess tends to skew a little older, but not as old as Holland America. I'd say I'm in Princess's target demographic age. Royal Caribbean had a mix of ages. I think it will really depend on the month you go to Alaska. On the October Royal Caribbean cruise I took, there were more kids than I expected, but that was when a lot of kids were still doing online school in 2021. Norwegian was definitely the youngest crowd of my 4 cruises to Alaska. I don't want you to get the impression it was sloppy college-age spring breakers, because it wasn't. There was just a vibrancy in the passengers that I saw on Norwegian that seemed to be missing on Holland America and even on Princess. So let's talk about the activities on board. In many ways, the age of the passengers does correlate with the activities on board. Holland America didn't have much in the way of activities on board. I remember going to trivia, art auctions, and computer classes. They didn't have much in the way of nightlife. There are no water slides. They do have a nice card room, and they also have a well-stocked crow's nest that has board games. On the whole, though, it's pretty tame on board Holland America. Most Princess ships have a big screen over the pool where you can watch sporting events or movies. Like Holland America, they don't have water slides, but going to Alaska, you probably won't be looking for water slides anyway. I think Princess has a pretty good variety of entertainment, like parties by the pool if weather allows, or those parties could be in a lounge. I really liked the Skywalker's Lounge on Crown Princess during my September cruise. Some of their ships have inside pools or dedicated areas like conservatories to enjoy the views while mingling or reading. They typically have nice venues for watching comedy or dancing. Royal Caribbean has a few classes of ships that go to Alaska. I took Ovation of the Seas, which is a quantum class ship, and I thought that ship was perfect for Alaska. As far as amenities, it had a really nice solarium where you could sit inside or take a dip in a small pool. It has a big inside activity center that they call the Seaplex that has bumper cars, video games, and ping pong. It has the skydiving simulator iFly, and it has the North Star, which is a feature that basically takes 6 to 8 people at a time up high above the ship for better views. In addition, it has the inside promenade where you can go to bars, shop, or grab some pizza. Norwegian has some great features on its ships. I was on Norwegian Encore, and that ship has water slides, go-karts, fun simulator rides, an escape room, a plethora of specialty restaurants, and a really nice inside observation lounge. The water slides and go-karts are outside activities, and I'm not sure Alaska is the best itinerary for those activities, except in the throes of summer. Its main stage shows were the best I've seen on any of the ships that I've taken to Alaska. Food. Food is my favorite subject, but I must admit that I'm not a foodie. If you are a foodie, I would say that Holland America might be more your style. I thought the main dining room food was pretty fancy on that cruise line. I don't recall many complimentary grab-and-go food places on Holland America like you'll find on the other cruise lines, though. I thought the other 3 cruise lines were comparable in food quality to one another. Princess has ample meat portions, at least I thought so. Through the app, you can get food and drinks delivered to you 24 hours a day for free if you have Princess Plus, or for a one-time setup fee if you don't. Royal Caribbean's menu rotates regionally, like one night is Italian night and one night is Caribbean night. And I really like how they do that. They used to have a classics portion of the menu, which were staples you could get every night, but they got rid of that in 2023. I like that the menu change has urged me to move out of my comfort zone. Norwegian has an excellent cheeseburger. that you can get at many different venues on the ship. But what disappointed me with Norwegian was that they didn't have a lobster night like the other cruise lines, and I never saw Alaskan staples like salmon or baked Alaska on their menu. Another advantage of Norwegian is that they have an almost 24-hour complimentary restaurant called The Local, where you can always grab a bite. So time in port. Let's talk about the time in port, which does have some nuance. Here's a table of the different cruise lines' time in port for this 2025 Alaska season. This includes my exact Norwegian Encore itinerary with stops in Juneau, Skagway, and Ketchikan. I pulled itineraries for this season for the other cruise lines I've been on, so these aren't from the itineraries of the ships I was actually on in prior years. These are for this season. I thought it made more sense to make it an apples to apples comparison for 2025. I was looking for 7-day Alaska cruises, which is the standard cruise length, that stop in Juneau, Skagway, and Ketchikan. Then I logged the times they each had in port and then calculated how much time they had total in these ports. Notice that Juneau port times tend to be in the afternoon and evening, except for Royal Caribbean. Skagway is a long port day for all of the cruise lines, and Ketchikan tends to be a little shorter. You'll notice that total port time is the highest for Royal Caribbean itinerary and is second highest for the Holland America itinerary. Princess and Norwegian had the shortest time in port. What you don't see here, but is definitely worth noting, is that in Juneau and Ketchikan, Norwegian Cruise Line has the least preferred cruise dock. In Juneau, it's about a 20 to 30 minute walk from the ship to town, or you can take the complimentary shuttle bus that will take about the same amount of time if you consider wait time. Other cruise lines dock in downtown. In Ketchikan, Norwegian's dock situation is pretty bad. Norwegian docks 7 miles away from town. Waiting for the shuttle bus and the drive to town takes about 45 minutes. Then if you need to take the shuttle bus from downtown back to the ship, all of us passengers were told we had to be in line by 11 a.m. to catch the return shuttle back to the ship. So even though we were technically in Ketchikan for a little over 6 hours, it was really about 3 hours unless you take an excursion through the cruise line that picks you up at the ship and takes you back to the ship. I think this is a significant disadvantage to Norwegian Cruise Line to Alaska. But ships and even different weeks can be different, so I encourage you to at least look at Norwegian and see the port times for your specific itinerary. Even though Royal Caribbean has the longest time in port, I couldn't find any itineraries that included Glacier Bay for Royal Caribbean. There were itineraries that included other glaciers, but just know that if Glacier Bay is a must-do, at least in 2025, you can't get there on Royal Caribbean. Back in 2021, I went to Glacier Bay on Royal Caribbean, so keep an eye out in case things change. So let's talk about cost. I tried to do an apples-to-apples cruise fare cost comparison, but as you've likely experienced when trying to decide between different cruise ships and cruise lines, it's difficult to get an apples-to-apples comparison. Itineraries are not identical. Ships serving a location vary in age and amenities. The dates are difficult to line up, and then add in the different cabin categories. And as you know, cruise lines offer dynamic pricing, so prices are constantly changing. It's difficult to do an apples-to-apples comparison with 2 ships and beyond difficult across 4 different cruise lines. So I couldn't do that cost comparison. Now I'll look at my subjective impressions of each of my Alaska cruises. I'm noting when I went on each cruise and what pops into my mind now when I think back to each cruise. My first cruise was the Holland America Westerdam in July 2014. As I said before, there was a fire after only being on board for a few hours, and we unexpectedly turned back to Seattle for the night. I was bored on this cruise because there wasn't much to do on the ship. I love that our balcony cabin had a bathtub. That is very rare for ships, and I attribute that to the Westerdam being an older ship, and that might be a nice touch that Holland America does. Now, I put puke here because I kept seeing puke around the ship. I saw at least 4 different piles of puke that hadn't been cleaned up yet during the week I was on the ship. I have never seen that since, not even once on any other ship. So that remains memorable, not in a good way for me. The overall vibe on that cruise was that I was bored. My second Alaska cruise was on the Royal Caribbean Ovation of the Seas in October 2021. I love the bumper cars, and so did my cruise partner. I think we did them at least 10 times. The North Star, which is a moving observation globe, was also really neat, and it was free on port days. The solarium was my favorite place to take a dip in the hot tub and read. And I learned that I love tres leche on this cruise. The overall vibe on this cruise was that I was really into the ship's amenities. My third Alaskan cruise was Princess Cruises' Crown Princess in September 2023. I realized how much I love Princess Plus that comes with Ocean Now on this cruise. And you can order food and drinks from the app and have them delivered to wherever you are on the ship. I love the Princess sliding glass doors in the balcony cabins. Norwegian also has these, but I first saw them on Princess. Royal and some of the other cruise lines have heavy doors instead. The sliding door is so nice because you can crack it at night and listen to the water. Crown Princess has an awesome lounge on the top deck in the aft or back of the ship. It seemed like no one except me found it, so I could read and have my drinks and food delivered to me there while having the place to myself. There was a grab-and-go place where you could get some awesome chicken sandwiches and street tacos, or you could order from the app to wherever you wanted. The overall vibe on my Princess cruise was that I could luxuriate in laziness. My fourth and most recent Alaskan cruise was the Norwegian Encore in late April to early May 2025. The Choir of Man was the best show I've seen on a cruise to Alaska. The show captured each performer's talents and personality. I love the casual dress code for the dining rooms with no formal nights. I was very frustrated with Norwegian's inferior docking situation in Juneau and Ketchikan especially. The Ketchikan docking situation severely impacted how much time you could spend in downtown Ketchikan. And finally, I love the Norwegian thermal spa experience, especially the heated loungers. The overall vibe of this cruise was it definitely had some unanticipated hits like the stage shows and the thermal spa, and one big miss, which was the docking situation. So here's the big question. Which cruise line would I want to take back to Alaska? My Holland America cruise was definitely the worst of the 4. Of the other 3, I would have to really think hard about taking Norwegian again to Alaska. Not because of the ship itself, but it was that docking situation that would make me not even want to get off the ship in Ketchikan. So it's down to Royal Caribbean and Princess. I think Royal Caribbean definitely has a more active vibe. I went with my 71-year-old mother, and she was keeping up with me on the bumper cars, so don't think Royal Caribbean is just for younger people. The downside to Royal Caribbean is that they currently aren't going to Glacier Bay. I also really liked the Princess cruise because I liked being lazy and getting food and drinks delivered to me, and there were definitely things to do around the ship as well. So if I wanted to see Glacier Bay, I'd likely choose Princess. If I was okay not seeing Glacier Bay and seeing different glaciers instead, I'd likely choose Royal Caribbean. Whatever cruise line you decide to take to Alaska, I hope you have a fantastic time. Please like and subscribe if you found this video at all useful. Thanks so much.